Hi, my name is Steve Jeantet. I am a pastor in the PCA and currently planting a church in Sarasota, Florida. I have a PhD in organizational leadership and I am a certified working genius facilitator. Over the next few minutes, my objective is to introduce you to the working genius model. We're going to take a look and see what makes it different from personality profile tests as a productivity tool, one that specifically will help you understand the way that you like to work, the parts of any work that you enjoy or get frustrated by, and that of your team. And so you can begin to see how a team would work together using complementary working geniuses. Working Genius is built around an acronym of widget, wonder, invention, discernment, galvanizing, enablement, and tenacity. I want to speak to each of these real briefly. Wonder is that kind of pie in the sky. Why is the sky blue? The person who asked the question of why something is like this, or ask the question that no one else even ever thought to ask. There's some wonder in there as to why is the world the way it is. Invention responds to the wonder by saying, oh, that's an interesting question. Here's an idea. Here's a product idea. Here's a concept. Here's an application that would kind of meet to answer that wonder. Discernment then evaluates the invented idea or product. Is that a good idea? Is it a bad idea? Is it onto something, but maybe not quite right? Discernment evaluates the invention. But then we start to shift towards galvanizing. Galvanizing looks and says, hey, there's a good product, there's a good idea, there's a good concept. Now we need to get people involved. And the galvanizer is the one who calls people to action to get them in and get them involved. Uh, Enablement is the first to respond. They're the people who love to jump in, the people who love to say yes and want to be involved in making something happen, in executing a plan. And then your tenacity people, those are the people that love to see a product finished, see a job complete, see an idea implemented. Imagine the ball's all the way down at the 2 yard line. The tenacity people are the fullbacks that love to drive the ball into the end zone. The basic framework of working genius is that every person has two of those six that are their geniuses, ones that they particularly love. In particular, you find energy from doing it. That if you are working in an area of your genius, you find life and joy and value in your labors. And your two frustrations are those areas that kind of suffocate life from you, that take the air out of the room. You can do it, but if you do it for very long, you're going to find yourself slowing down, not finding joy in your work. And the two in the middle are your competencies. The two competencies, those you can do, they're not the things that you are your favorite, not the ones that you necessarily love doing, but you can do them and do them often admirably well. And so every person has two geniuses, two competencies, and two frustrations out of these six. When we break them down, they kind of fall into three major categories or stages of work. The first is ideation, the wonder and invention, the say, ask the blue sky question, and then to come up with an idea that responds to that. On the other end are the implementation, enablement, and tenacity, the get it done. The challenge is a lot in the middle, and this is where this model is so valuable. The activation, discernment, and galvanizing that works in that middle space to take it from idea to implementation to activate people in the process. These six kind of break up into two main categories of responsive and disruptive. The responsive geniuses, wonder, discernment, and enablement, are responding to something. The wonder is responding to something in the world, some question that arises, some external stimulus that brings about the question. Discernment is responding to the idea that's been invented. Enablement is responding to the call to action from the galvanizers. On the bottom half, you've got the three that are disruptive. And what we mean by disruptive is not that they're bad, obviously, but that they shake the system out of the status quo. It's one thing to have a question at the wonder and you can kind of leave it there, but it's very disruptive when you say, hey, I've got an answer to that question. I've got an idea for us to consider. The galvanizer is disruptive because if there's an idea, but nobody calls anybody to action, it can kind of stay in the idea space. But the galvanizer is kind of that bridge into implementation and forcing something to happen. And the tenacity is disruptive when everyone else is ready to move on to the next thing. The tenacity person wants to keep going. And here's where this, one of the areas where this becomes so valuable to consider is that there is guilt and judgment involved. And this was particularly insightful even for me within myself. There was a point of being guilty that I was not good at all of the things, maybe even a little jealous of other people who are good at something that I thought I should be good at. So there's some guilt involved. On the other hand, there's some judgment that I can impose on other people when I look at something that is within my genius, within my skill set and strength, and that I love to do, but is not for someone else. And I can kind of look down on them and judge them for coming up short on the thing that I really like, but is not their genius. And so even here, the guilt and the judgment piece helps us to evaluate ourselves appropriately, to maintain the humility, recognize the areas that we're gifted, and not feel guilty about what we're not. On the other hand, to not pile guilt and judgment onto someone else for not being as good at something as you are, instead being able to delight in their geniuses because you need their geniuses alongside of yours. Next, we look at the altitude of geniuses. And it kind of works from wonder, invention, discernment, galvanizing, enablement, tenacity, works all the way from the 30,000-foot view, why is the sky blue, down to the on the ground level of implementation and tenacity. One of the ways that this shows up so valuably is we are all inclined to pull a conversation in the direction of our geniuses. So for me personally, my geniuses are invention and discernment. I like to live in the world of ideas. And so if I walk into a conversation, it's really helpful to recognize, hey, this is an execution implementation conversation we're having right now. I'm gonna have to be really careful to not try and pull the conversation up to the ideas level and focus on the implementation of the idea. On the other hand, those whose geniuses bend towards implementation, enablement, tenacity, like to get down into the details and work through. And sometimes you have to say, hey, that may be a good question, that may be really interesting, but we're not there yet. We're still looking at the idea. Do we even want to do this in the first place? We don't need to worry about how many name tags we have if we haven't even decided whether we're going to do this initiative in the first place at all yet. And so there's a lot of value in being able to recognize the altitude of the conversation that we're having and be able to pull people back to that, as well as to self-regulate when you find the conversation is drifting or is in a place that is away from your geniuses, to not try and pull it back to your geniuses because it may be right where it's intended to be. One example that I use when I've worked with a women's ministry team is that if I went to them in September and said, hey, I know you're starting to work on your Christmas event. Here's an idea that I had that I was thinking about that may be really valuable, a great idea that they can interact with. But if I went to them the day before the event with the exact same idea, it would neither be helpful nor honoring to them at the point where they're looking at execution. Do we have name tags? Do we have Sharpies to write names down? Do we need any extra place settings? Or do we have enough napkins set out? All of those types of questions on the implementation side, my idea would not be helpful in that moment. So recognizing where a conversation is in the altitude can be very helpful in keeping that conversation in the right place. So here's the overall kind of all in one. As you move from wonder, which identifies the need for change, and uh, to the invention that generates ideas and solutions, to the discernment, assessing the workability of that idea, galvanizing, calling people to action, pushes people to act, enablement, which helps move things forward by being the first to say, yes, I'll do it, and the tenacity, the ones that keep going so that we ensure successful results. Now, let me give an example how, even in the context of marriage, this is really helpful. My wife and I, this has been very clarifying. I am an invention and discernment. My wife is an ET, enablement and tenacity. Even within the context of our marriage, we recognize that how that has played into, say, the way that we're planning a vacation. If we want to plan a family vacation, I'm going to be the one that says, hey, what about this location? And come up with ideas and evaluates whether or not it's a good place to go, whether it's the right time of year, season wise, because I'm doing the discernment work. And so when it comes to the big picture, a lot of times I'm the one who thinks about where we should go on vacation, who buys plane tickets, who books the rental car, books the hotel. On the other hand, when I pack for vacation, I do it probably a half hour before we're ready to load up the car and leave, because I just get all my stuff together and I'm ready to go. But if we followed that approach for my kids, we would get on vacation and we'd have plane tickets and we'd have a hotel to stay at, but what they would not have is their toothbrush. Because my wife, who's the enablement and tenacity person, very detail oriented implementation, builds this long, extensive packing list that always makes me laugh. But my kids take it and they pass it between them when they're packing. And then they can say, well, we need 4 shirts, 2 bathing suits. We need to pack a towel. We need flip flops. We need sneakers, whatever it is. It is my wife's packing list at that detail tenacity level that make sure that our kids get on vacation and have their toothbrush with them. Which of those is more valuable in the process? Of course, that's the wrong question. We need the ideation that I bring to it, and we need the implementation that my wife brings into it. And so, in that sense, our gifts and our geniuses work alongside of one another to make possible a trip that wouldn't have happened if it was just one of us. When we look at each of the geniuses, we can recognize that there's things that genius craves and is crushed by. For example, again, looking at my own of invention, crave the freedom to create and invent without restrictions, and is kind of crushed by uh, restrictive parameters, being forced to stay inside the box. Even before ever seeing this chart, I would say, people, I do best if I get to pretend there's no box to begin with. Telling me to stay inside the box, telling me not to reinvent the wheel is a way to crush me, to handcuff me. I like the freedom to just think through. And sometimes that's going to mean reinventing the wheel, but that's the fun part of the project for me. And so each of the 6 has something that they crave and something that they are crushed by. And as we work together in teams, it's really helpful to recognize so that we can move towards our teammates in a way that is feeding the thing that they crave and being careful not to crush them, which then begins to set us up for our ability to look at a working genius profile. when you take the assessment, you will have received a report, and that working genius profile report is going to help start to identify your two geniuses, your two competencies, and your two frustrations. This example is from Patrick Lencioni, who is the developer of the working genius model. It just so happens that my report is exactly identical to his. My two geniuses are ID, my two competencies are W and G, and my two frustrations are E and T, similar to Pat's. But you're going to identify, when you look at your report, it's going to identify for you your two geniuses, your two competencies, and your two frustrations, which then it begins to create the opportunity for you to look and see some pairings that is created. Notice that in this, if it's W and I or I and W, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter the order. If your wonder is first and invention second, or inventions first and wonder second, and all the way through for each of the pairings. The order of them is not what's important, it's the pairing. Again, looking at mine, ID or DI is the discriminating ideator. That is somebody who is innovating, developing ideas, but is discriminating in the sense of, because I have the discernment, I'm often reevaluating and discerning the idea as I go. So for me personally, if I have an idea, it's probably on version 12 before I say anything to anyone else, because I've been discerning. I act almost as my own feedback loop. The upside of that, and recognizing that, is if I have an idea, it's probably pretty well developed. I've probably considered a bunch of factors in it. The downside is if there's a factor that I've not considered, I may need to think, I may think that I've already accounted for all the variables. And so it's often helpful for me to check myself and pull in another person with the genius of discernment to help me reflect and make sure that I am not missing anything in my discernment process. But for me, the discriminating ideator, I like to come up with ideas and I evaluate them. So I'm almost acting as my own feedback loop in the process. Each of the pairings has their own unique, separate beauty that they bring to it. And I hope that that's one of the things as you look at this, every one of those is valuable. If you are missing any of the six in a conversation, you're probably going to find that that is the area where you are struggling, either whether it be in a marriage, in a team, within an organization, any type of space where you're going to need to be looking through and figuring out how to pull other people in and to recognize the beauty of other people's geniuses in the process. And so here we get a little bit more detail of each of those pairings. Again, looking at the ID, discriminating ideator, a creative, intuitive, and confident generator of new ideas, uses instinct and integrative thinking to solve real problems. Even before this language, I would have said that's kind of what I do. And this has been so insightful to say there's something in the way that God has made me. And I would say that in whatever pairings are true of you, this is the way that God has made you in order to be honoring to Him the gifts that He has given you to bring to a team. So, with that, I want to say that there is a lot of beauty in this. Each of these in the working genius model is really healthy and helpful and beautiful, and we want to honor them. And a team is going to bring them all together in a very helpful and healthy way. So I hope this little video is helpful for understanding the working genius model and reflecting on it. The next step would be, as a team, to look at a team map and be able to assess, where is your team? Where are the strengths of your team? Is there an area where you tend to lean? Is there a gap in your team map? And then how are you going to work together as a team in a way that will bring that all together for the good of your team.